Gertrude, we can begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amelo. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today for this webinar on words that often as boards we hear, we'd rather not hear, we'd rather not think about, but we must hear all the same. I welcome our lead members on the line. It's good to see those that I can see and even feel the presence of those that I cannot see. I also want to welcome our panelists today and the moderator, and I'll talk a little bit more about her as we go along. Today, I am standing in as a dangerous substitute for our usual host, Ivan. As some of you might be aware, Ivan lost his brother earlier this week. I think as we speak, the burial is happening. So I want to request you to keep him in your thoughts and prayers and to send him your support as much as you can. Now, as a board member myself, I often struggle with the relationship I should have with technology. On the one hand, I understand how important it is, but on the other hand, I'd rather leave it to somebody else to do the work. And the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, has taught us many things. I think the most important, or one of the most important things that has come out of the pandemic is that entities, corporations, whether in private or public sector, can no longer afford to maintain the fear of technology. I think boards in the past have been reluctant to embrace technology or to go as far as they could with technology solutions, digitization and the like. But the pandemic has shown us that we have no choice, but we must embrace it. During the pandemic, we saw that technology was really a way of life, a key element of our ability to continue and to remain resilient in our businesses, but as an individual, staying in touch, and the like. And so we have seen over the last few years, but accelerated over the last 2 years, that technology and digital solutions are no longer enablers. I think when I first started on a board, we looked at technology as an enabler. Now technology is a transformer. It is a transformation of how we engage, a transformation of how we do our work as directors. It's a transformation of operations. And ultimately, it is a tool that not only gives us efficiency in the work that we do, but also delivers real value. And so the question then that arises for us as boards is, how do we oversee what we do not know? Of course, on the line, and they'll talk about themselves later, some of our panelists are on boards and they also have a technology background, and they're, I think, among the few of us on this call. So if we take it that the board's role is oversight and strategy, how does the board do that? How does the board ensure that they have the information necessary to make the decisions? How do we as directors develop the ability to ask the right questions inside the boardroom and outside the boardroom? How do we, together with management, see technology and digital solutions as a way for us to win, as a way for us to create value for our customers and stakeholders and to get ahead of the competition? How do we look at risk in technology? Do we understand it? We talk often about cybersecurity. We're talking about data protection. We're looking at new legislation that is coming in to better regulate the interaction between technology and enterprises. As a board, how are we thinking about risk? How do we think about cost in the boardroom? How do you make the call on which, if you're from financial services, how do you make the call of the right technology to use? What's the best core banking system for your business? how do you ask those questions as a board member? And for that matter, is having the best technology sufficient? How do we translate the best technology into solutions that deliver value? So for us as board members, we have some guidance from different sources. But what I've also come to realize is that just like technology evolves quickly, so does the ability of boards to be able to catch up with that. So in other words, we can never have enough information about digital solutions around technology and how those interface with the businesses that we are responsible for. And so we have guidance, we have King 4 on governance of technology. We have all these codes and rules, and we can look at them from a pure compliance perspective. But today I'm delighted because we have people with technical understanding of how technology can be harnessed for value in our organizations. Before I introduce our moderator for today, I just want to say that if you are like me and you have so many questions on technology, we have a chat open, and I would like to encourage you to post your questions there. I know Amelo will be keeping an eye on the chat room. She will try and get the questions answered. But the good thing is that we have excellent panelists. I know that even after this webinar, they will be able to follow up. So I want to welcome you all to this webinar. And I just want to make a brief introduction of Amelo. Amelo is our moderator for today. I know she will talk more about herself, but very briefly, Amelo Ejalu is a managing consultant of Fort Axis Limited. She's a success-driven ICT professional with proven expertise in leading end-to-end operations of large-scale, high-value technical projects. Amelo is equipped with experience in a variety of sectors in Europe and Africa, which include energy, telecommunications, manufacturing, banking, professional services, and charity and development organizations. She led the completion of multiple enterprise resource planning SAP modules, which led to Umeme Limited, which most of us know, receiving a gold achievement for implementation excellence and fast delivery categories at SAP Africa Quality Awards, which also achieved bronze status at SAP Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Some people call it SAP, I am calling it SAP. What gives me significant pleasure as well is that Amelo is a member of LEAD, and so we are in good company. We're hearing from our very own, and the other members on the panel, at least 2 of them, are also members of LEAD. So I'm delighted that within us, in our midst, we have experts on this subject, people that can hold our hands as directors and take us through this journey of understanding technology, engaging with it, harnessing it, and hopefully getting value from it. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Amelo to take us through this session today. As I indicated, the chat room is open. Please post questions. Let us get the discussion going. And so over to you, Amelo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gertrude, for that introduction. Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for investing your time with us this Thursday. Today, we have an amazing panel discussion on how corporate boards can harness the heightened role of digitally and technology-driven operations. As Gertrude mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for effective digital and technology strategies. Therefore, most medium to long-term strategies we have actually seen being brought forward to short to medium-term strategies. Therefore, bear in mind that postponing digital transformation gives organizations a great competitive disadvantage. Our goal today is that whatever your role is on corporate boards, that you'll come away with something, a new idea, some knowledge, a fresh perspective, perhaps a new strategy that you can apply to contribute more effectively in the decision-making within the boards with regards to digital transformation projects or operations. So the webinar format shall be as follows. I just want to delve into that so we can get straight into the discussion. We shall initially hear from one of our panelists. Then we shall invite the other panelists to contribute to the keynote presentation, as well as give us some insights on the experience on the topic that is being discussed. Thereafter, we shall open up the webinar flow and give you the opportunity to ask questions through Q&A option. It's at the bottom of your screen for those who don't have it, but if you do prefer to use the chat, you could do that as well. I hope that sounds okay for you. Great, so let's start, get into it and introduce the panelists. The first panelist is Dennis Kahindi. Dennis is Chief Executive Officer at Liquid Intelligent Technologies, also known as Liquid Telecom, Uganda, a leading independent data, voice, and IP provider in Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. He is an accomplished business lead with over 15 years domestic and international experience. He has worked with entities such as Microsoft, Eaton Towers, Hawaii Technology International, and Oracle Corporation in Rwanda. Dennis is an expert in understanding market dynamics, industry trends, customer challenges, and competitive positioning, with consistent achievements in driving innovative and cost-effective business strategies. Dennis, you are welcome. Our second panelist is Donald. Thank you. Our second panelist is Donald Waigumbuluzi. He is the country manager of Ericsson Uganda. He is an experienced business leader with multi-country experience handling global customer accounts across Africa and Middle East. He has over 15 years experience in ICT telecommunications industry, in leadership, ICT operations, project and program management, and also technical expertise in wireless and fixed communication technologies, as well as mobile financial services. Donald's career has seen him work in several engineering and leadership roles in Uganda, Rwanda, Mauritius, and the Seychelles. He's currently overseeing the digital services portfolio for Ericsson in Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Eswatini, Zambia, Uganda, and Rwanda. Donald, you are welcome.
Thank you.
Last but not least, our third panelist is Ravi Krishnawamy. He is the Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Azure Global Industry. Ravi has led multiple acquisitions and large-scale go-to-market partnerships through his career. He has been in the forefront of multi-billion fundraising and is passionate about building high-performance organizations by nurturing diverse, inclusive, and collaborative cultures, and in giving back to the community. He has spearheaded the creation of Microsoft Azure Industry Digital Transformation Charter by breaking down data silos and enabling AI, that's artificial intelligence, led innovation across the value chain. His industry portfolio includes, but is not limited to, retail, consumer goods, supply chain, agriculture, manufacturing, energy, carbon and sustainability, financial services, media and entertainment, and more. Ravi, you are welcome.
Thank you.
So these are your panelists today for the webinar discussion. To get the webinar discussion going, Ravi will share his experience and insights towards the board role in digitization. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Amelo, and fellow panelists and lead organization for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing the next 30 minutes, my experience and insights into board role in digital transformation and the interaction with top management team. First and foremost, throughout history, technological evolution has always revolutionized business model. Take a locomotive industry. We started with steam engine, then upgraded to diesel engine, then electric engine, and then magnetic levitation, if you will. What is constantly driving all of this? It is consumer expectation. With consumer expectation and technology evolution, business models constantly go through changes. Those that adapt are able to capture the new enterprise value that is being created. Those that cannot perish. And this is actually the constant thing to expect. What I'm showing on the right-hand side, as you can see, consumer-led experience, this is the pinnacle of consumer expectation, changing an entire industry, creating an entire industry, total addressable market, if you will. Humanity's fascination with space travel, and which has caused even the world's richest investor to clobber into this industry, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and multitude of others. So much so that today, SpaceX Starship has completed a 10-day mission to International Space Station at $50 million a ticket. And it's just fascinating, right, in terms of how consumer expectation and experience keep us on the toes in terms of business model evolution. If I were to extrapolate that, we are living in not anymore in agrarian economy, not even industrial economy, not even service economy. We are in the experience-led economy that is forcing the digital transformation. So those that are able to create differentiation, create a competitive barrier, those that are able to differentiate with premium experience, that are able to really capture pricing power. The greatest example here I can think of is Apple, right? That all of us are familiar with. Even after the advent of iPhone, almost 17 years ago, it is still capturing a premium. It is the most valuable company on the planet. And that shows how digital thinking in board and top management actually has a big role to play in terms of innovation of business model experience leading to consumer experience. So what are the pathways of future readiness? What is the different transformational journey? Again, there is no one road to Rome. Multiple roads lead to Rome. I am showing here, like we were to plot this into 2x2 grid, with the x-axis, the horizontal axis showing operational efficiency, and the vertical axis showing customer experience. So the traditional, the left quadrant, if you will, is I am calling it silos and spaghetti. It is essentially before industrialization, where we didn't worry about driving either the operational efficiency or the internet era integrated experience that is actually driving customer expectation, as we saw with SpaceX and the space industry. So the magic quadrant is to be on the right-hand top quadrant of future readiness. Next, I will show you like different path the industries and companies have taken, the boards have taken in terms of their future relevance. First path is driving through operational efficiency. It's the most familiar path because most of the enterprises that started in the industrial era are familiar in terms of driving operational efficiency, and through that, eventually drive the integrated consumer experience into future readiness. This is a very valid path, and we will see some successful example, some not so successful. And then the second path, which is the more born in the internet era experience, if you will, which is the consumer-led integrated experience to begin with, and then worry about profitability and operational efficiency to the future-ready state. And then there is the waterfall model in between, right? So, you kind of drive a business model change, and also you are hedging against operational efficiency. It is again a very valid path. You will see examples of industries and the beachhead transformation of those industries as well. And then there is born in the future ready state. And these are all the players that actually take advantage of the historical learning and being able to be in the right place and innovate with the right get-go of a transformed state. Let us now walk through a few industry examples. Let me take internet age, if you will, and let's see what are the examples. Internet was pretty much back in the 90s, was pioneered by AOL on the access side. And those of us, by the way, all my examples are going to be North America heavy, pardon me. But it kind of gives a very illustrative example of successful companies and boards that have taken different paths. AOL pioneered, those of us that lived in North America, if you remember the DVDs that they used to ship, it is the or CDs. It's the dial-up modem-based access to internet. Yahoo pioneered the content delivery model, right, in terms of getting internet, news and different contents, etc. Both of them, maybe because of the bandwidth of the nascent stage of internet, etc., they failed to really innovate on the customer experience access to really capture the enterprise value. So they pretty much not transition to a vibrant future-ready state. Let's look at an example, which is a born in internet era Google, both in terms of integrating from Gmail to all the way down to Android operating system. Google has shown that the integrated experience, those of us that are not in Apple ecosystem or in Google ecosystem, and they have shown that getting that consumer experience first and then driving profitability, they didn't come up with ad-led monetization. They started with a search engine. And being able to monetize later to future-ready state, they are still ruling that particular internet segment. And Microsoft, near and dear to my heart, has taken the waterfall model, whether it is AOL, we used to have MSN, which was even parallel to internet like AOL was. And on the other end, Google, we had Bing search engine to compete with Google. We had Android for Android operating system. We were the pioneer of Windows Mobile first before Android operating system. But we stumbled our way on the client axis and then enterprise and cloud axis. I'll cover more a little later on in the presentation. And it is again a very valid model. And Apple, as I covered, had the benefit of really waiting for others' misfortune. And really in 2007 onwards, Apple reinvented directly into internet era. That is the way I see it, in terms of really getting an integrated experience as well as a premium business model in one shot, right? And as such, they are still, as I called out, the most valuable company on the planet. Let's take retail, another industry. Walmart is the large scale, low cost retail operator at volume. Catering to all of US. Within 5 mile radius, there is a Walmart in every nook and corner of US. And they were predominantly focusing on driving up operational efficiency. And because of their maniacal focus on operation efficiency and getting a low cost, like economical value to the consumer, they were able to transform to future ready state. Again, very successful example. Amazon, much like Google, was born in the internet era. And so they again obsessed. Again, Amazon is one of the premium company, just like Apple, that I admire in terms of customer obsession, how they are able to encapsulate value later on. They didn't worry about, in Amazon.com, they didn't worry about operational efficiency and profitability. but it was just pioneering the internet e-commerce delivery model, if you will. And then, moving to the right in terms of future ready state. And I want to show the waterfall model here, the Best Buy, which is a premium electronic retailer, e-tailer these days, and Costco, which is a wholesale retailer. They actually took a waterfall model to future ready state. And Flipkart, it had the benefit of, which is an e-commerce large, market, leading market shareholder in India, which I've had the fortune of working for as well. Was able to benefit from Amazon's, journey and being able to really invent in the future ready state. And I also, for every Walmart, and by the way, Walmart eventually ended up acquiring Flipkart. So, it's a very successful path of going through operational efficiency to live and thrive, and then eventually get to the magic quadrant, if you will. And there are examples like Circuit City and Sears, whose boards and top management team never really prioritized the internet era. As such, they perished. They are no longer, with us. And one more example, and then very quickly we'll move on. Media entertainment, if I look through that industry, Blockbuster was a major retail DVD rental outlet along with Hollywood videos. And they pioneered the model of DVD rental, but they missed out on the internet era of streaming. And Netflix, again, captured the internet user experience first in a seamless manner, and then got into the future ready state. In between is Sony, right? So they tried different business model, from consumer electronics to PlayStation, which is their gaming network, to even movie production and so on. And they were successful in getting to a future ready state. The Disney is one interesting example that I want to quote here, right? They are not necessarily born in the cloud. The content is king, and they want premium content. And they acquired a bunch of companies to get to future ready state, particularly launching Disney Plus, which is their version of streaming service, which is now giving a run for Netflix money. And as you all saw a week or so ago, Netflix, for the first time in 10 years, reported subscription erosion. And as such, a third of Netflix market cap evaporated. So again, even a born in internet era company is not spared in terms of customer expectation and the constant evolution. And Disney is a great example of a late entrant being able to capture premium value. So why all of this is important? And it basically gives us a perspective of, you can't manage the present alone without actually destroying the past, some of the legacy. And you need to also be prioritizing the creation of future adequately. So it is a multi-horizon view board must have and top management team must have in terms of being able to operate across all horizon. And let me just, in this example, I'm showing like automotive industry and how they missed out on, the electric consumer-based battery operated vehicle transformation that was happening for years. Again, 10 years into that transformation, they are still catching up to Tesla. It's largely because the old manufacturers of cars didn't really prioritize the future ready state. And let's look at Microsoft 10 years ago when Satya took the realm. He was faced with Windows Mobile. As we saw, Windows Mobile was shedding a market share or shed market share to Android and Apple. So as such, our Windows client business was in peril. But there is also market expansion and threat happening in terms of cloud, eroding into our server market share. So we had to make a pretty sharp call in terms of cutting the legacy, which is Windows Mobile, and really focusing on cloud transformation and not just manage the present for ourselves, but also transform the industry with it and get our customer install base successfully moving on to cloud. And now I am a part of industry charter, it is the next journey as industries transform to cloud. It is capturing the industry valuation is where the boards must focus on, including Microsoft board and Microsoft top management. So why digitally savvy boards are important? This is a fascinating study by MIT Sloan Management Review. They studied all US corporations that are of 1 billion revenue or more, and they found out that only 24% of boards are digitally savvy. And it's here another fascinating stat. At least 3 board of directors need to be digitally savvy for the entire board and top management to be effective. Again, these are qualitative study, quantified, but it is a fascinating story. And what do they correlate against? Whether it is a revenue growth or return on asset or market cap, they saw those that meeting the criteria having a markedly different differentiation in terms of all these parameters. Hence, it is very imperative that board must lead the change. Gone are the days of mitigating risk as the compliance and governance aspect of the board. I think we need to be asking the question of what is the opportunity cost of not doing an initiative, not doing a business model level innovation to the business, right? What is the risk coming off of that? So it is almost turning the equation upside down. What is digital savvy? I think often digital savviness, in board conversation tends to be, what are the digital, metrics and tools and, different methodologies and operational metrics that you use to review the board KPIs. That in and of itself is not adequate. It is the mindset shift predominantly for me, right? It is a cultural shift in terms of asking what is digital's impact on the success of the industry and a given company. What is the technology-led business model you ought to be pioneering proactively? Because as we saw throughout history, the industry examples that I highlighted, one constant thing is that you need to be proactively disrupting your own legacy. And then you need to be very honest about the readiness of technology adoption, the extent of technology adoption. A lot is said about adopting of technology as a tick mark, but are you really enterprise scale in terms of really understanding when to commit? When you're experimenting, when you need to take an inorganic partnership route, and what are the success and challenges, and how are you actually metricing that? All of this collectively is the digital mindset that board needs to be shifting into. And this is not one magic bullet, but it is, as I said, it is across all these axes. What is board's new innovation imperative, right? As we saw, it is no more about managing risk alone. It is about, first and foremost, having a challenger mindset. Having a challenger mindset to break through in terms of new examples, new trends emerging, and really driving the competitive advantage in a savvy manner. Often boards struggle with innovation, and it's a multitude of reasons, right? There isn't a one single reason. First and foremost, board needs to be honest. Again, going back to the MIT's metric, at least 3 digital directors need to be innovating. And that's just a minimum bar. And I'm calling it rebuilding the board for innovation. Often, boards need to be honest. The chair needs to be honest. The steering committee needs to be honest in terms of critically evaluating the board itself. Often, again, the risk agenda can be outdated. Innovation agenda can be outdated. Often, there is no sufficient time for innovation. And as I said, all of these parameters, come into play in terms of board innovation, board-led innovation criteria. And the second bucket of challenges that I have seen is the interaction between board and top management team. It is good to agitate with a new idea. It is also abrasive if not done right. it is almost redefining the partnership two ways. It is not only what board can do to help top management team to be technically savvy and digitally savvy. It is also the other way around. What can top management team can do to educate the board to be digitally savvy? And it's either can be a collective diversity or collective literacy and illiteracy, right? If not done right. So then again, board must be willing to encourage risk and celebrate failure in a calculated manner. And that's the only way that the culture shift will begin to happen. And there are multiple examples of that throughout the history. So to me, 3 dimensions of technology board engagement, summarizing it all. First, I would say that you need to start with strategy. It needs to be a growth and innovation-led strategy. Of course, data and insights are very integral part of driving the innovation as well as measuring success. Customer experience and really ecosystem level parameters need to be innovated around, right? You really need to pay a keen attention to what is happening in the industry and how do you change along with that and lead, in some cases, the change. Then you shift to performance of those metrics, right? Whether it is financial performance or business operational metric, how technology can be adopted. And the last that I want to call out is the talent growth and talent transformation along with that. Often it is underlooked, the top management team down, including, as I said, including with board, needs to be a top level KPI, board KPI in terms of measuring talent's digital savviness. Not just for the top management team, but throughout the organization, right? And the more you actually digitally transform, the more risk management actually start needing to look very different. Suddenly, cyber risk needs to actually be taken more front and center. There are a lot of regulatory matters you come in. The more consumer data you collect, the more regulated industry you operate in. I think it adds a different level of dimension and complexity in the internet era. And then, as I said, right, disruptive technologies also is a risk along like paying attention to technology trends and encapsulating, always being paranoid and encapsulating that value as you move along. I have couple of more slides and then I'll give some time back. This is again another fascinating stat for me. Again, a same MIT survey of 2019. Roughly 3 billion and above revenue company in US. The top management team, as measured by the savviness metric of 50% of top management team to be digitally savvy. It is only 7% of the companies that meet the criteria. And those that meet the criteria, the right-hand side shows almost 50% higher growth compared to their not so digitally savvy peer group. 50% higher market valuation, which should be a great enough motivation to be able to transform. And of course, net profit margin is a trailing factor that goes along with that as well, given the scale. This again, without getting into the details, whether it is innovation of new products, bringing in new revenue, or cross-sell, upsell of existing portfolio, there is a marked difference of the top 25% of the metric, the companies that meet the metric versus the bottom 25%. And it's a staunch difference. And the results, the best practices in leadership is little qualitative analysis. And again, these are all deep study done by MIT. But the results bucket is a very quantitative one, as measured by publicly reported revenues and in a lot of such financial metric, including the completion of transformation, right? So the 70% completion leads to those 50% extra market cap encapsulation, if you will. So with this, right, I think it's the board's role. I cannot underscore the importance of being, shifting the mindset and be really metric driven and really take the top management team along. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is no CEO or top management really want board to get into the weeds. right? Even despite the good intention. I think the right way to approach this would be like, if you can slowly bring the innovation mindset and bring the industry trends, slowly but surely the right conversation, right agitation will happen. That'll be all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for taking us through your experience and insights. The statistics definitely are making most people sit up, I would say. And yeah, it is true that most corporate board members usually do not know where to start or what questions to ask with regards to digital technology operations and projects. Case in point is by having only 24% of the boards in all the firms that are there, it's a challenge, and it means that decisions are being made elsewhere. So most times you find that the boards have either less members that are technologically savvy or no members at all. The solutions have actually seen that some board members are putting in place is having IT committees. But some of these committees are also driven and chaired by less tech-savvy members. The others decide to onboard someone who is more tech-savvy directly into the board, and others just choose to walk to the CTO or the CIO to assist them with making decisions on various projects that are being tabled tabled in front of them. So maybe what I would like to ask you, Ravi, is what is your view or experience of these strategies that I've put forward that are currently being used in terms of facilitating effective board decision-making on the digital technology operations and projects?
No, I mean, I think all your observations were bang on, Amelo. Like, this is a two-way traffic, right? So it's not as I called out. It's not a one way in terms of board driven, right? So I think the intervention in some cases, the agitation, as I call out, in some cases for some board might be the right tool. But often, like as I said, walking up to the CTO, CIO, any of the C-suite in terms of educating yourself and also like being pointy or the right ways to have that dialogue, right? And then often what I found, what the most productive conversation I have been part of in board as is when a member really brings a new trend, new mindset question, right? So that really starts triggering the right conversation of why not, or what is the opportunity cost of doing versus not doing, and that fundamentally will get everybody rallying behind the right attitude and right conversation, right? So technology can be even a trailing thing in terms of implementation, as long as mindset is a leading indicator.
Thank you, Ravi. I would like to give Donald an opportunity to share his thoughts on the topic today, digital transformation, and give us some insights and perhaps also some submissions of what you've presented. Donald, over to you.
Hi, Amelo. Thank you very much. It is difficult to add a lot to what Ravi has said. I think it was cross-cutting in terms of technology and the context of the board. I think, like the topic rightly says, harnessing digital and technological transformation. For many people, I think there has been the COVID-induced component the transformation. In fact, there's some estimates that maybe most industries have moved 3-4 years ahead of their own transformation agenda that they had previously planned. But then there's the other component, which is the evolutionary transformation, which mostly comes out of the requirements or the demands of the consumers and the utility they expect from the different organizations. So just to set the stage a little bit, I think mostly we have accepted digitalization or digital transformation in two components. The first part being mostly driven by the internet, the first part being the connectivity, basically the access part, and then the second part being the apps, which basically provide use or some functionality. But then I expect, and Ravi touched on this a little bit, that the board must be mindful of the trends and the direction that digital is taking. But because right now what I think we are moving towards is a new realm, which includes now components like Internet of Things, which includes things like big data, cognitive science, and especially even the Internet of Senses. So I expect that there will be a complete revolutionization of what we call digital, from being a two-dimensional thing to being a three-dimensional thing. There are already discussions about investments in the metaverse and what that really means. So looking at my own field, coming from the first introductions of 1G in 1979 until now, we're talking about 6G. It's not so many years. So the pace of evolution and change is really high. So I think that the first support any board director who's dealing with digital can lend themselves is with skilling and trying to understand exactly what these different changes, what implications they have on the business. Now, whatever happens, I think two things will remain the same. Consumers will always expect the best experience and for the best price. And that puts a new demand on the organization to continue to drive the best competitive advantage and the best value for the customer. But at the same time, that does not mean that the best solution, which sometimes we have seen, is that when people or organizations and boards have wanted to respond to these new requirements that they see in the marketplace, they have run quickly to infrastructure. And again, infrastructure is just a part of the discussion. We have seen added prominence for things like ESG on the boards when it comes to digital. Ravi summarized with a great slide, which on the one hand talked about the risks, on the one hand it talked about the strategy and so on. And I want to add onto that slide the ESG component. The board role also still remains the oversight of the operations of the corporation. So on the ESG side, a few things stand out. For instance, as we are adopting digital into our operations, how much attention are we paying to the ethics that come with it? I think in 2014, the top three companies in Detroit generated the same revenue as the top three companies in Silicon Valley. The only difference was the companies in Silicon Valley had only had about 10 times less workforce. So this automation that we are putting, this digitization that we are putting, this artificial intelligence that we are putting into our digital operations to be able to drive whatever business objectives we're looking for, how much attention are we paying to the impact that it has on the workforce today and on the future of the workforce. And how do we answer some of these ethical questions that come with it? For instance, from an AI perspective, AI bias, also specifically on that point, the inequality that comes out of AI operations and the owners of these companies. There's the additional component of energy consumption. Each time that we are going to invest in these hardware solutions and these platforms, how much attention are we paying to the impact that the resultant energy consumption is having on the environment and on the climate? And I think we should pay significant attention to that too. Innovation, which is a culture, again, that the boards can help to drive both within the organization and within themselves. Ravi talked about SpaceX. And ultimately, SpaceX did not do anything that NASA or Roscosmos had not done before. They just did it differently. Some estimates show that NASA spent about $350 million each time that they needed to refurbish and repurpose a spaceship for it to go to space on the second trip. What SpaceX generally did was come up with innovation to be able to reduce the cost of that return trip or reuse of the same spaceship, and by that be able to travel back to space at a lower cost. So we on boards need to be driving a culture and supporting the executive and the management teams in their innovation demands and plans as they go along. There will also be, I expect, the changes in business models and in operating models that come out of the requirement for us to be more agile and more flexible. There's some estimates that show that each time that we have been thinking about investments, banks mostly, they have invested up to maybe 82% in just infrastructure. But the infrastructure, in 82% of their digital budgets in infrastructure, and only the other 18% in the actual components that drove the final business outcomes and utility for the business. The problem was that because they already had large legacy systems, they were not flexible enough to be able to turn around the products that they wanted to take to the market. And this is the difference with some of the new startups. They are coming in at a time when it's the internet age. They're coming in with internet age equipment that is able to quickly provide for the agility that is required of the different customers that they are fighting for with the older banks and the older legacy banks. So in our approach to business, and also driven by the boards, there must be a culture, and I think even measurement, KPIs or OKRs, however you look at it, on the time to market and how we are able to achieve it through the digitization that we are putting in, because that's where the utility is. And to be able to deliver that at an acceptable cost and within an acceptable time, there have been changes in business models and even commercial models, like platform as a service, for instance, infrastructure as a service. And they changed the commercial model from what we typically had, from an asset-based model, which we are writing down into our balance sheets, into an OPEX-based business model, where we are simply just renting space and providing the agility that we are looking for. So we must also, at the board, I think, be able to appreciate the new business and commercial models that come out of the shift from the old ways of doing business to the digital component. Ravi did mention about what the digital director should look like going forward. And I liked his summary, which is 1, the skilling, number 2, the awareness of the trends, and then number 3, which is the mindsets and the challenger mindset. So for those who are on boards, how much appreciation do we have of the trends such that we are able to add valuable input into a discussion with the management teams on why we should take one direction or another direction? How much competence have we built onto our boards to be able to support the decision making quickly of the management teams as they are facing these situations on a day-to-day basis? There's a lot of terms that go around lately in technical discussions, and also how quickly we can be able to transition. Citibank, I think it is, in 2016, took a decision to have an internal startup. And this startup was going to be built around a model of a digital organization, of a digital startup. The intention was for it to be detached from the old biases and ways of working of the legacy company, and for it to be able to emulate the competitive ways of working of a startup and compete with fintechs. That's one way. The other way, which we have seen, has been partnerships, where the old organizations trying to adopt digital have partnered with the whole ecosystem of vendors to be able to provide that digital edge that they are looking for. And some has been a hybrid. And for the board, the decision of which one happens, which one you take or which one you don't take, in your advice towards the management team can be a make or break, because some models are not good for one organization or for another. So the board needs to be awake and mindful of the different models that there potentially could be. And then finally, I think the other item that I could think of is, especially for boards, when it comes to the risk, there are ambitions, even from Ericsson, for instance, to have over 50 billion devices connected by 2030. Some of the devices that we are connecting through machine to machine are not inherently built to have security features. For instance, fridges talking to your toaster, fridges talking to your cooker, and so on and so forth. They were not traditionally built for risk, for cybersecurity. So with 50 billion devices in an organization, you can imagine how many points of exposure to insecurity you might have. So we must again be mindful of the increased security threat that comes out of digitalization, and there must be a deliberate effort to incorporate it in the ERM. But that's the technical part. We have just recently been suffering from a severe semiconductor shortage coming out of having only main suppliers in Taiwan, and everything that's happening in the South China Sea and what impact it potentially could have. And the supply chain and the logistics have been impacted by delays of up to 9 months. How do you anticipate this risk, and how do you manage it at an enterprise level? And how does the board keep abreast with these kinds of risks that are operating? Everything in the end that is digital has got to be data-driven. So I would urge very much that the board support the company and the management teams in creating what might be a subset of the overall strategy called a data strategy. And the data strategy would include, among other things, privacy, would include, among other things, who has access to data and who doesn't have access to data, so as to be able to democratize the data and make it actually useful for the people that need to use it to make decisions. But the right person must have access to the right data, not the wrong person having access to the wrong data. What we have seen sometimes has been an explosion of data coming out of digital operations without a clear plan on guidelines on how that data has got to be used. And so many things could potentially come out of that, data leaks and so on and so forth. And finally, there's going to be an explosion of the ecosystem of different types of players. The competitive landscape will change, the vendor landscape will change, and so on and so forth. But together with that will be a lot of mergers and acquisitions, will also be a lot of failures, and so on and so forth. That's not going to end. So again, when you are selecting what vendors you want to go with, or what partners you want to work with, there needs to be some significant consideration into one, is the partner a security threat? And two, are you dealing with someone who's going to be sunset tomorrow? And what impact does that mean for your business model and your operating model? And also the barriers to entry into different businesses have now changed. Now your competition doesn't have jurisdictions. You could be in Uganda competing with a small startup in the US for the same market because there's no jurisdiction. And the board, as well as the executive, have got to be mindful of all these different trends that are happening in the competitive landscape, that are happening in the entire ecosystem of the value chain that they provide. Like I said, it's difficult to add much to what Ravi said, because I think to do that is to risk getting into technical terms and things like that, which maybe the board sometimes can take their time on having to catch up into. Thank you, Amela. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Donald, for your insights there, your experiences, and a heads up in some of these areas. I think we are still re-echoing that the board should be able to appreciate new business models, trends, and for them to be able to make effective decisions, lead in making those decisions, for management to be able to execute the strategies in time. What the other area that you mentioned that I agree usually isn't looked at in boardrooms is the ecosystem. And with boards becoming technology savvy, they'll be able to evaluate any projects or proposals that are being put on their table 360, not just your operations, the customers, the efficiency, but going forward, how does the ecosystem impact those strategies in the short, medium to long term? You touched on digital responsibility to be able to ensure that while we are onboarding all these technologies, we are also being digitally responsible, ensuring that the customer data is protected and various third-party data is protected. I don't know if you may have something else to add towards that, just to emphasize the point on security and what has been your experience. Are there any other examples that you can give to just drive the point home that the board really does need to understand at least 30% of their responsibility in terms of making decisions in digital and technology operations and projects.
Sorry, Amelo, I just missed the question. Could you please repeat?
The question is, could you give us more insights in for boards being digitally responsible or organizations being digitally responsible? Decisions are being made, let's implement these technologies, but they need to understand that the technologies that are being implemented, yes, onboarding more customers, are giving a customer experience, but there's also a risk and where perhaps, you know, not every hole has been plugged, and therefore, you know, you're getting people accessing the systems from behind the scenes and such. These are some of the questions that boards should be able to understand, or maybe ask, or maybe areas that they need to look out in terms of being digitally responsible.
So I think I'll say this. At the onset of cellular technology, when we had 1G systems, fine, it had problems with the sound quality and so on and so forth, but and it could only do voice, no pictures, no data, no nothing. It turned out later that the biggest drawback of 1G systems in 1979 was that the air interface between the phone and the network was not encrypted. So anyone with a radio scanner would be able to get into a phone call that was happening and keep a copy of your conversation. When we went to 2G 12 years later, the first thing that had to be done was to do some ciphering and encryption to be able to protect just that data. I have seen statistics of organizations losing up to 40% in revenue, of the equivalent of their revenue, through security breaches and data theft. And that number could very easily be going up. So a lot of times, I think we are fixated on the value that comes out of investments as being that which drives revenue, as being that which drives a competitive advantage. And in fact, even Amelo, you would know, in our rollout plans, we don't spend so much time on the non-functional aspects of systems. Our justification and business case usually falls on the functional aspects because that's what equals a product, that's what equals the money. And with increased attention to risk, I think boards need to have an appreciation of the security component being just as important as the functional aspects of any technical deployment that we have. Now, with the cloud services and orchestration, we are reducing the amount of control that there is for human intervention in these systems. With Internet of Things also, you have 1 million sensors. I mean, if I have a laptop now, you give me a password, and only if someone else has my password can they log in. But if you have a fridge which is supposed to get onto a network, then it happens without any password control. And that could be do or die for whoever is using that fridge. So I think it cannot be emphasized enough how much value boards can put on the non-functional aspects and security, in this case, of business proposals that come from the management team and the security component compared to the functional components.
Thank you very much, Donald, for your submission. And those insights. I would like to encourage the people in the webinar to post their questions on the Q&A or use the chat facility as well. We will get to a session where we will be reading them out and posing the questions to the various panelists. Okay, I would love to introduce Dennis now to share his insights and experience towards a board's role in digital transformation. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you so much, Amelo. To my fellow panelists and the attendees, we appreciate your time here. We don't take it for granted. We're happy to share our thoughts. And I just want to start with a build up on what Ravi shared earlier. The 21st century board is not yesterday's board. Yesterday's board had a very simple brief. That brief was really around shaping the organizational strategy, selecting leaders, especially the CEO, and safeguarding the company's culture. The conversations have changed over the last 20 or so years. With the more uptake of technology, we've had more established technology conversations coming into the board. The board has then had to deal with questions around IT security, digital innovation, technology projects, returns on investment. This transition has brought technology to the center. Part of the reason why we're having this webinar is really what now does the board do? I like what Gertrude shared earlier when she said, how do we oversee as boards what we do not know? And we're saying this is a very pertinent question which must come to the center of all the conversations that we have in the boards. Ravi shared statistics around the current number of tech-savvy board members on the Fortune 500, and he said it was about 24. Statistics range between 24 and 31% of the top 500 S&P companies having at least between 25 and 30% of tech-savvy boards. The reason why is IT is a major cost center with a very thin access to management. The only steward of IT conversations within management is usually the CIO. The CIO has very infrequent visits to the visits to the boardroom. But unfortunately, despite how important the conversation around technology is, we realize that the board's meetings are usually very episodic. Some boards are meeting once a year, others biannually, others, the most frequent ones I think are quarterly boards. Most of these boards don't have technology subcommittees. Most of these boards don't have the ear of management within the overall organizations. And yet, making one strategic mess will not only cause catastrophe to the organization, it will bring very huge costs on the board and very huge costs on management as well. So the technology conversation and the digital conversation must be at the center of every operation. Ravi highlighted what we think boards must focus on in today's world. One of the things that boards must focus on is the management of risk. When we're talking about risk is where we're talking about the conversations around the cybersecurity, conversations about regulatory risks, conversation about environmental disruptions. Now that is something that needs to be front and center of every single board meeting. The second issue that we need to talk about that I think Ravi also highlighted is around organizational performance. Now, organizational performance is no longer measured by one-to-one appraisals. There are tools that are available for us to measure organizational performance. Now, to do that, the board to appreciate the outcome of the different performance reports, the board must either be technologically savvy or at least have technologically savvy representation at either the board itself, the subcommittee itself, or have management come in every once in a while, especially the CTIO here, coming every once in a while to speak to the investments that are happening within the organization. And of course, finally, is really around the strategy, which is really the integrating factor around what boards used to do and what boards need to be doing now. That we don't expect a board to focus on strategy outside of technology, because there is no single strategy, no single organizational strategy now that is not enabled by technology. Every single strategy. Donald talks about ECG. ECG will be enabled by technology, and every other strategy within the organization as well must be enabled by technology. So management must set out plans. When management sets out plans to invest in technology, how do those plans then feed into what the board must offer oversight over? We think there are a couple of things that need to happen for the board to have its major say within the management's investments strategy. One, on the strategy, we're thinking about growth. When the board comes in to make decisions around the investment in technology by a different organization, the board must be thinking about growth. The board must be thinking about innovation of that entity. Number two, the board must be appraised with data and insights around where investments must be done around that very technology. The third is really around customer experience. The board must be concerned around what the investment that is being made by a certain investment in technology is going to have, the impact that investment is going to have on their customers, and largely on the ecosystem disruption. Boards must be aware that every investment or the lack of it, has either a disruptive impact in the ecosystem or a disruptive impact within your very organization. A failure to invest in an ERP, for instance, and you continue to do things manually, would cause you to probably be a laggard. And if you're a laggard in an organization whose change is running from a 1G technology in 1971 to a 6G tests in 2022, then we have a very major problem to deal with. I know that by default, the board's emphasis is around, can we protect and can we preserve? Can we protect what the investments that we've already made, and can we preserve those investments as well? The board needs to begin to understand, and this is where management needs to come into the board and say, we cannot just protect and preserve. Boards cannot sit back and just be risk averse. We need to take very bold steps as board sometimes, and that guidance should be based on the knowledge of not only someone within the board, but the filtering in of information from management, and if possible in some organizations, at least subcommittees. But every single board in this 21st century must have at least either logically savvy member sitting on that board, two, a very vibrant subcommittee, technological subcommittee, and three, a management subcommittee that fits into the board if they don't have a technologically savvy person at the board. I believe these three dimensions will enable the board to harness the digital disruptions caused around by technological changes. Amelo.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. And really emphasizing and overemphasizing the urgency of corporate boards harnessing harnessing the heightened roles of digital and technologically driven operations, which is the topic of our webinar today. And I think you've driven that home. We see trends coming out here. The key one is the ability for the board members to be able to lead in decision-making around the risks and issues that will keep cropping up. I don't want to go into all that right now. I would like to give the participants an opportunity to ask more questions. We have a few questions that we've received. Kindly send in your questions. If there are any areas you would like emphasized, any challenges you've faced with your boards that you may feel have not actually been addressed, do post your question and we'll try and address it as best as we can. Yeah, so I would like to kick off with the first question, and this question is from John Weir. It's directed to Ravi, but before I direct that question to you, Ravi, I just want to inform the participants that Dr. James, one of our lead directors, will also be responding to some of the questions that have been posed within the Q&A. So I would like to start with Ravi. I know you're eager to go, Ravi. Yeah, so John Weir says, I would like to know if Ravi sees any correlation between move to tech savvy and impact on work culture. Has he any examples of this impact?
It's a good question, and it varies from segment to segment and industry to industry, right? So, for example, work culture is vastly different between front office and back office, right? Field operations, frontline workforce versus knowledge workers versus high tech workers. I think I can cite few examples, right? Like frontline productivity in a lot of the old industries that are transforming is super critical. And when you actually bring data, AI into more and more automation driven, more and more technology driven decision making, it invariably flushes out the tribal knowledge in the system. And that usually is a good thing for productivity, but also it's a big change management that needs to be very proactively thought through and managed, right? So that's one example. For example, when we had to do supply chain transformation in terms of full funnel automation and AI-driven optimization, even in a modern company like Flipkart, there were a lot of tribal knowledge that needed to be worked out. Right, and you often gamify and change the incentive and some of the comp structures, etc. I'm a big fan of whatever you reward moves, right? So I think kind of also taking that along, there is a positive correlation to that. If you take the lot of the high tech worker space, I think the correlation is largely positive in the sense that first. For example, take oil and gas industry. Let's say that you're bringing in a new way of doing seismic analysis using a lot of data AI tooling, as opposed to the better physicist, geophysicist wrangling a lot of the old way of interacting with data. Let's say that that's one example. I think in that regard, initially there could be a culture related change management you may have to really be proactive about, but then ultimately the workforce sees that as a positive impact on their day-to-day productivity. Nobody wants to do mundane stuff that can be automated out. So in that regard, I think the more technology adoption, the better for everybody in the ecosystem. Not just the workforce alone, right? A lot of the time, even the vendor and downstream and upstream part of value chain also benefits from the same in technology-led culture transformation, if it is an ecosystem-driven activity. So yeah, I don't know whether I sufficiently answered that particular question. Would love to understand, like, other panelists have a different point of view or correlation that they have seen.
Thank you, Ravi. Any other different observations, responses from Donald, from Dennis? If not, I would like to move on to the next question from Robin Kibuka. And Robin's question is, question. Excellent presentation and discussions, a compliment to you panelists. So give yourselves a pat on the back for that. He then proceeds and says, data analytics is crucial to understanding customer experience. How can board senior management approach this issue, especially in developing countries which face limitations in this area? I would like to pass this on to Dennis to respond, and perhaps Donald can supplement, or Ravi. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Amelo, and thank you, Chairman Robin, for that very excellent question as well. I think the place where I want to start is no single board should assume that their company has the right to survive. Now, the knowledge of that causes every single board to be very mindful about the data that they process. There are tools that have been created around customer experience. Many of them sit, fortunately, in some of Ravi's platforms, that Azure platform, which I'm very conversant with, to enable us pivot with different data to improve customer experience. But like you rightly say, Chairman, we have a big challenge on the African continent, where one, in terms of knowledge base and resource, that we do not have sufficient resources to be able to mine data and create sufficient understanding for not just board, but even management, to create a strategy around. What I need to say, though, is if we make a mistake in the board and we do not deliver, one, in identifying and highlighting a strategy that we must run with, but two, in failing to deliver on that strategy, it starts with us as management, and ultimately the board also gets on the hook. In a sense, the responsibility of accountability trickles through right from us as the board through to the management on the company's performance. So we need boards to direct the conversation around making the baby steps in investing in various technology and data analytics tools to enable us appreciate and react to various and changing customer needs. So I think that's something that we must guide the board on, and the board must hold us accountable on, because any mistake made in that regard would cause very serious consequences to us as a business. Thanks, Amelo.
Okay. So I think that the business case for investment in data analytics is fairly easy to make at whatever level, in whatever form that you want to do the analytics. Whether you want to make it predictive, to be able to build a model that shows expected revenues, expected customers, and other business metrics, even just to make it descriptive, to show the current situation of a specific, the current status of a specific situation, churn rate, or anything. The visibility that comes out of the analysis of data, I think it's fairly easy for a board to appreciate. What maybe has been a challenge, or maybe has not been very clearly explained, has been the broadening of different use cases. I don't know how to pronounce this. I think it is Xiaomi or Xiaomi, the Chinese phone maker. What they have done is, what they have done is they crowdsource business ideas. So instead of having, on top of having a team of people who are actually determining what the market is looking for, they've got a platform that crowdsources business ideas. So different users will give feedback and also try to guide the company on what features they are looking for next. And the company can extrapolate and see what the demand is for particular features and make an investment decision on the R&D of that particular feature. Telstra in Australia crowdsources customer service, for instance. So many people come onto a forum of users of the service of Telstra, and they give different feedback on a particular service that they like, that they didn't, what improvements there should be. And people can be able also to talk amongst themselves and help each other with fixing particular problems. And that cuts the cost that ideally would have gone into call centers or service centers, and even on the calls that are taken by the technicians. So there are wide use cases. However, to galvanize all this, I think, like I said, it has to be captured in a specific data strategy that can be driven by the management and also appreciated and endorsed and supported by the board. And in there, we should have the different use cases, the data that we are expecting to harvest, what processes we should take that through, the access and the privacy, and so on and so forth. So, Dr. Chibuka, I think there are many use cases for the data analytics, and if the management is able to tie a specific data challenge to a particular use case, I think it might be easy to make the business case for investment in data analytics at board level.
Thank you very much, Donald. I would like to request Dr. James, if you could, respond to the question from CPA Dr. Albert Otete. He says that, yes, digital is the new normal and the future of competitive advantage. Do we need board level digital transformation committee, or those specific mandates can be added onto another existing board committee?
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Amelo. You can see there's no free lunch. I was waiting for the closing remarks, but I've been pulled out to respond to this. Thank you very much for this. This is the risk of being in the midst of innovative people. First of all, I think Dennis had hinted on this, but I will just emphasize it now. Thank you, Dr. Albert Otete, my fellow accountant. Nice to hear you speaking at this forum. Now, this is one of those cases where there is no one size fits all. First of all, you saw from the statistics from Ravi, even in the most industrialized country in the world, the most tech savvy, only maybe 24 to 30% of the directors in the board are tech savvy. So you see that there is a challenge even with the big 500, Fortune companies. Now, the situation even becomes more difficult when you now come down to our region in Africa. Of course, we still have that challenge. And there's been a lot of debate in a number of boards around this matter. But certainly what is coming out very clearly is that we need tech-savvy directors seated at the board. If we can manage to have some, I think that would be very nice, 1, 2, or 3. That would be really good. The other argument which has been going around is, most of the tech-savvy guys are young. Should we have young people in the board? And I think most boards are beginning to say yes. It's time we start looking at this. But as I said, there's no one size fits it all. Some boards have set up committees to look at these digital transformations and keep an eye on it. A committee could be one way. Maybe if it works for your board, that is good. If that doesn't work, you could, for example, like Dr. Tete has said, you could have this responsibility given to another board committee, but you have to be careful because enough attention needs to be given to this particular subject, hoping that the separate committee that you set up will have enough space to discuss these matters, because the digital matters are really, really very important at this point. So I wouldn't say there is one size which will fit all. I think it's better in your various boards where you are, you need to look at your particular circumstance. What should we do? Should we bring in at least 1 or 2 or 3 tech-savvy members into our midst? Should we set up a committee? Maybe for some organizations that will work. And then, of course, at the very beginning of it, maybe you can say, okay, in the meantime, we can assign these responsibilities to one of the audit committees. But as I said, you have to be very careful. It shouldn't be assigned to a very busy committee which would not have sufficient time to deliberate into digital and technology issues. So I think I would give the answer in that manner. It will depend on your particular circumstances, and you need to consider it very seriously, because you really need this kind of discussions and conversations at the highest possible level of your governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. James, for stepping in. Just checking whether you are awake, ready for the closing remarks. We have a question from an anonymous attendee, and I would like to pass that question on to our patriotic panelist, Donald. If you've noticed, he has a Ugandan flag as in his background. The question is, how should a board deal with the encumbrances and distractions of a connected, old school, non-tech service CEO, especially in government agencies, where the board's role to hire, reprimand, and fire are tremendously limited? Donald?
So that's not entirely a digital question, yeah.
Sure.
But I think we have seen or heard of situations where the CEOs have been a bit detached from digital transformations, mostly only caring about the budget or the cost and the final outcomes, really, for which the digital transformation was set out to happen. That's one type of CEO. We have also seen other CEOs who rely largely on their technical teams to be able to provide updates, only key updates. And then we have seen CEOs who, in the midst of a digital transformation, will be interested in details like why our digital transformations are off track, the time to market and resultant revenue that's coming out of the digital products that come online. I have seen companies that actually set targets for the minimum number of digital products that must go live within a particular period of time. And I think because of the efficiencies that come out of it, because of the competitive advantage that comes out of it, there must be, I think it helps to have CEO oversight, CEO interest, and even CEO accountability in digital transformations. The biggest component, though, might be the culture that comes, that needs to come with a digital transformation program. I struggle to think that it would be very successful without the endorsement and active support of a CEO. So on the one part, I think the case for active CEO involvement in a digital transformation project is very clear and well made. What you do with one CEO who is detached, who is not involved, who is not in tune with the trends, sometimes I think the board can do that through the target setting. In the past, we had a lot of focus on just KPIs. Now, in different startups, you have more focus on the objective key results. So the KPI that is reported has got to translate into a certain objective. And if that is a certain business objective, and if the CEO doesn't supervise that, I think sooner or later it will show. There's also been some arguments for tagging digital transformation incentives onto the performance of the CEO. And again, if they're not in sync with the program, I guess in time that will show through the different evaluations. And there are mechanisms within the board to be able to advise or direct a situation where the CEO is not meeting the targets. But I think the most important part could be at the point of selection. I think boards also need to, and I can't say one way or another, I think I would like to hear another view from maybe Dr. Chivuka or PK on how much digital competence, digital skilling, or digital savviness must be weighed into the selection process of a CEO of any organization, whether it's a digital organization, an agro organization, or something. I would be very keen to hear what Dr. Chivuka says, or PK, and Gertrude.
Thank you very much, Donald. I'm being mindful of time here, and Gertrude is on our panel. Gertrude, would you like to supplement on that before we go to the last question? Can I go ahead with, perhaps you supplement, then I'll go into the last question.
Okay, thank you, Amelo. I'll take a first stab and PK and Robin can come in. I think the question is looking at the CEO being central to a digital revolution within the boardroom. I think, as has been discussed, the role of the board is strategy, is policy, is accountability, making sure that we align our strategy with digital transformation initiatives, and that we develop policies along those lines. Now, I would imagine that if the board takes that responsibility seriously, and I see a situation here where probably the CEO will not bring a technology or digital related initiative or policy or framework because maybe he or she doesn't understand it or is not interested. I think the board is not constrained in asking management to provide what the board considers should be the right framework. So I think, as the panelists have indicated, the board cannot be a passive observer, just waiting for what management is bringing and working on the whims of the CEO to provide what he or she considers is the relevant information. The board must be actively engaged in discharging the governance role of overseeing IT and technology and digital solutions, and ask for information, ask for policies to be framed, ask for strategic initiatives around technology. And I therefore feel that in those circumstances, if the board plays the role that it should, then you probably find the CEO is then on the back foot. I think what usually happens in many boards is that the CEO, no offense to those on the call, is calling the shots and the board is playing along. So if the board is fully equipped, aware, and savvy, as we've had, digital savvy, then they should be able to play the leadership role and the strategic role that they're expected to play. But maybe, I know time is running out, maybe PK or Robin wants to add anything before we give back to you, Amelo.
Thanks very much, the moderator. My comment will first of all be to thank members for the contribution they have made in this conversation. As most of us are aware, today, and I think in the future, every company will be a technology company. That means, therefore, that it's very important as directors join boards to be conversant with one important thing, that is to ask the kind of questions that will enable management to embed data and analytics in terms of decision making. So the issue of members of the board working with, working through, and working from a technology base is without question a very important requirement today. Why? Because precision and accuracy now is hinging so much on the quality of technology, on the quality of adaptability in terms of technology. So really, we see most of the companies today are reshaping their portfolios to make their balance sheets and also their cost structures more resilient. And there is no doubt that even the operations of the company to be made more flexible, to be made more operational, there is need to have a good working understanding of the digital applications. I will give you the example of, for instance, the board member is required to see how the strategy or the business model is working. And you have an app that's called Strategy Profiler, which would enable board member to ask questions around the cause, the diagnosis of the challenge the company is facing. So that's a bit diagnostic and descriptive, but it all relies so much on data and artificial intelligence. The second stage is now to find out why is this happening? Why is this happening? So from the cause, the description, we move to the diagnostic, and then the prescriptive. If we continue operating the way we are operating, what is bound to happen? Again, this is totally reliant on data and also on the artificial intelligence. And finally, what can we do? That is prescriptive analytics. So we are moving from the descriptive to the diagnostic, prescriptive, and also we are looking at also the predictive analytics. So when you are a board member, I guess the most important thing is to ask questions, but questions that are data-centric, questions that are exploring better opportunities for management. Because you see, when you are a board member, the questions are only two. What are we missing? What is our next opportunity? But all of it is centered around data and it's evidence-based. Thank you very much.
Yes, moderator. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much, Dr. PK. Dr. Robin, you can go ahead, 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, yeah. If I believe the question was, what does the board do with somebody, a CEO who is not IT savvy? I think if you cannot remove the CEO, the board can still be very creative in the sense that you can put a great deal of emphasis on who heads the IT, but also you could bring in an advisory panel to try to educate and enlighten the CEO. Usually they will tend to be very hesitant to move because they lack the information. But I think if efforts can be made to bring a great deal more information to bear on the CEO, you may be, as a board, able to move the CEO gradually in that direction. I believe you have to be creative in that sense and do the best you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Moving towards the close of this webinar, we'll have Ravi respond to the last question from John Weir. If data analytics drives good business governance and guidance, how did tech-savvy Netflix fail to predict and explain its current attrition? Over to you, Ravi. Please be concise. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelo. John Weir, thanks for asking the question. I think the main thing that I want to point out is it's not always the data analytics metrics alone, right? There are other factors that such as the market force and market saturation at play. Like if you really keenly observe this industry, and there is also overvaluation, right? Could be, right? I don't know that for a fact. But there is, there is market trends in the media entertainment industry is such that eventually the content owners like Disney, HBO, and all the other major, content owners have decided to go to consumer directly, right? And that is again a secular trend, and hence why Netflix has been, and the Netflix data analytics has been indicating that. Hence why, if you're a Netflix user now, Netflix wants to push all the first-party content on you more and more. So more and more, Netflix is looking more like a traditional content authoring company, more so than a new age streaming led aggregation company, right? Because every content is wanting to go direct to consumer. And the second point that I will point out is the advent of all the cloud infrastructure and then the maturity of that around streaming infrastructure and other such facilities also made it easy for more brands to go direct to consumer. And so the inflection point is hitting Netflix more so than anything else. Again, I'm not sitting on Netflix board. I don't know the internal metrics. But if I were to guess as an external observer, there are always not just only the looking at that data analytics driven metrics alone. There are other factors at play, and which could potentially be the reason why it is suddenly coming to roost this particular quarter. I don't know. That particular thing is a little puzzling. I think it could be that maybe there are other players that are giving incentive to kind of steal customers. And again, it is the saturation at play, I would think.
Thank you very much, Ravi. And I would like to wrap this up, but before I do, just to convey my thanks to all the panelists here. Thank you for your responsiveness to the invitation. I would also like to thank the participants for making time and hanging on with us and their contributions to this webinar. Thank you so much for your time. And the technical team around me, the lead technical team, thank you very much for the support. And last but not least, thank you, Lead, for the opportunity to be the moderator for this webinar. Thank you. At this juncture, I would like to hand back to Lead, and that would be to Dr. James Onyoin, to make the closing remarks for this webinar. Over to you, Dr. James.
Oh, thank you very much, Amelo. Thank you for steering the ship so well. I can see we're landing very safely. We're almost on the runway. I would like you to maybe borrow some extra time, some 5 minutes to enable me to close this down. But most importantly, like you've said, I also want to echo my thanks. Thanks from the Board of League of East African Directors. My chairperson is here. I'm sure she's smiling behind that camera. Yes, there she is. She's extremely happy, very, very happy to all of you and the entire board, who are here with us. I've seen Robin Kibuka, I've seen Dr. Peter Chimbo as well. I think I saw Stephen, even James Serugo might be on the line and others. So I really appreciate, I want on behalf of the board to say thank you so much for our panelists. It has been a great learning. I've personally learned a number of things. I will mention it later, but let me also first thank the Secretariat for the League of East African Directors, Ivan, and the technical people behind putting this together and making it really work. It's most appreciated. I want to thank our sponsors. We have a number of sponsors who have enabled us to carry out a number of activities. Most of you are still fresh from the NED Awards. You saw how wonderful that was. There were a number of people who believe in us and who facilitated these programs and a number of other activities. And of course, there's still a lot of opportunities for people to, to participate in sponsoring some of these activities. The Secretariat will get to you about that. But of course, most importantly, I don't want to forget the participants. Your presence, your questions, the time that you have given to us, it is most appreciated. And more so, we really appreciate that we have a membership which is enthusiastic about learning, a membership that's enthusiastic about knowing the trends that are ahead of us. And really, I want to appreciate that. Among the panelists, I want to also, in a special way, to thank Ravi. When I was given this task to invite Ravi, I said, wow, how can I invite the Vice President of Microsoft in the Silicon Valley to come to the League of East African Directors? But of course, thank God I got introduced to you earlier. We had several interactions, even at the Innovation Village, at Tim Roberts, and so on. So I'm really happy. Within 2 hours, he had already responded to me that I'll be there. So I want to say thank you very much for that. Thank you, Ravi. And of course, I also want to say that there's a lot that we're trying to work on. Ravi, for example, has shown me something I had not, realized. Dr. PK has been talking about future-ready accounting officers. I didn't know where that future-ready term comes from, but you've shown me that it comes from a high level of, operational efficiency and a high level of customer experience. So that's really something that's very, very commendable. I want to say that I also had some conversations with Ravi earlier and is willing to support us and continue with this conversation with the other panelists. I'll be talking about that in a minute. But I want to appreciate your interest in LEAD, and in fact, we'll be inviting him to join LEAD as well, and I'm happy that, if he can join us at some point later. Now, to the members, I wanted just to mention that there is a lot of things that the board is thinking about. We are thinking about making these conversations not a one-off event, not talking about the tech savviness today and then we waited for another 3 months. So we have these lead conversations in the webinar, but we want to also now create what we call fireside lead conversations, which will mean that outside this, as we leave this workshop, this webinar, the conversation should continue. And I've already been working with we have been working with the panelists here. They're going to give us some ideas. Please be open. We'll reach out to you for your comments, for your ideas, how we can make this lead, fireside lead conversations to become a reality, so that once we have a major webinar like this, the conversation should continue around that field. If we have another one on oil and gas, we should have a core team which will be interested in it. We could call it a stream or a cohort, whatever it is, and then the conversation continues. But how it will be done, we'll get back to you and pick your ideas, and then we see how we can do it. The other one, of course, we're also thinking about mentorship programs. There are some of us who have been, in the boards for quite some time. I personally sit in the board of Citibank, board of ESCOM. I chair audit committees in those two, and also in UAP Insurance. I sit in a committee of parliament for accountability. And of course, I've gathered experience over the years, so I could be able to mentor some people. And there's also what they call reverse mentoring. That maybe some young people can make me more tech savvy. So we're thinking about all those, but we'll be getting back to you and then get some ideas through our online platforms. And then we see how we take these conversations, make them even more continuous, so that it is not one-off events in a quarter, but conversations that will continue. Thank you very much, members. Thank you for your attention. We have really shot beyond our time, and I would like us to stop it at this point. Thank you very much, and I will hand over to, after closing remarks, I think, Gertrude, you can just say bye to the members. Just wave to them and we close the.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, for your time this afternoon. Thank you, Amelo. You've been a fantastic host. Thank you to the panelists. Lead members, we'll be seeing you very soon. Keep your eyes on the screen. Something is cooking. And I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, and bye to Ravi.